So, guys, as a consultant, the first thing that I need to do to actually, even understand what the issues are or what the opportunities are, I need to know the background of the person, right? So, kind of example to look at would be that if you need a relationship advice and you reach out to a friend of yours, the reason that they are straight away, able to give you an advice is because they already know the context of where you're coming from and your romantic relationship and so on and so forth. So therefore they know, oh, you should leave this particular person, right? Or they're like, oh, you messed up again and you shouldn't have done it, because they already have a certain idea about who you are as a person, what are the kind of issues that you might have, and what are the issues that your partner might have, and so on and so forth. But if you reach out to a random stranger and you're like, hey, my I am going through a breakup, how should I deal with it, right? A random stranger would not be able to solve your problems really well. Why? Because they don't really know what kind of a person you are. Maybe you should go out and party and that might actually work better for you. On the other hand, you could be someone who might want to hit the gym, right? Or someone who might prefer to get a tattoo to help you move on over your partner. So the point is that different people cope with issues and opportunities differently. And the same thing goes for businesses or organizations, because again, they are pretty dynamic, right? So as a consultant, the first thing that you always need to do is try and understand the context, or the where that particular business is actually coming from. And to do that, there are some very, very good frameworks out there which will help you understand a little bit more about where the business is coming from, who are they catering to, what is the kind of competitive landscape that they happen to be in, which will again give you a better understanding of their problems once you start understanding about them, right? So as a consultant, initially, whenever you actually get a case to work on in your real life, you would of course be initially doing a little bit of research about what this business is, what kind of customers do they cater to, what kind of competitors do they have, right? What kind of which kind of partners do they usually work with, and so on and so forth, so that you have a very good understanding about the context of the business, right? And 3 C's is just one such framework which helps you get a direction in terms of how to do your research, right? So I'm a consultant and someone tells me, that, hey, we've recently onboarded this client called Red Bull. And, we would be working on a case where we are, Red Bull happens to be facing certain issues with respect to their staffing. And we have to figure out or help them with a strategy which will help them further strengthen their employer branding. Now, before we even think about Red Bull's employer branding issue, we need to know what is Red Bull, where do they come from, right? Which market do they cater to? What are the kind of customers that they have? And to get a proper structure of doing this research, 3 C's kind of acts as a gateway. Okay. So let's have a look at the 3 C's on the basis of which this framework is actually based out of: customer, company, and competition, right? So customer is very, again, when we're talking about the customer, we are not just saying that, oh, this is the ideal customer profile, or this is who we are talking about, or Red Bull is bought primarily by youngsters, right? We are not just looking at customers as a very, very superficial thing to actually know about. We have to dive a little deeper to understand who are the actual customers of this brand, right? Where are they present? How do they buy? So basically trying to understand the specific target group that this particular brand caters to. Why customers? Because at the end of the day, any organization survives by solving the needs of their customers, right? That is the primary goal of any organization. So that's the reason why, of course, we need to look at the customer. We need to understand where they're coming from, who are the people that they are being catered to, how do they buy, so that we are able to get a better understanding of this particular brand. The second thing that we obviously need to know about is the company itself. So what's the business model? How do they make money, right? Or where is it present? So when we're talking about where is it present, we are not just saying that, Red Bull is based out of this specific city. We are actually talking about how does this particular brand position itself, right? Are they trying to cater to, say, are they a energy drink brand? Are they a sports brand? If they're an energy drink brand, what do they actually stand for? What are their values? We're trying to understand the business in a little bit more depth, so that we can understand how does this particular business actually operate, right? When we are talking about scales and trends, if I ask you, if is Red Bull a big company or is it a small company, you might tell me, oh, Red Bull is a huge brand, right? The reason being that Red Bull has X number of employees. Someone might come and say that Shawrya, Red Bull is a big brand, not because it has X number of employees, but because it is doing a revenue of, X billion dollars, right? Or you could come and say that Red Bull is a big brand because uh, it's spending ABC amount of money. So the point is that even when we are talking about the size of the company, there could be multiple parameters that we can look at to decipher the actual size of that particular company. Okay, so it's not just one metric that will actually help you understand whether the business is big or small. So for a very long time, in fact, even today, Zomato is incurring losses and huge losses. And there could be a small business based out of a very small city, which is a profitable business. Does that mean that that small business is actually larger than Zomato? Not really.
No, not really.
Because when you say that, you're only looking at one specific parameter, which is profit. But Zomato is employing thousands of people. They're generating X amount of revenue. They're catering to thousands and lakhs of active users, which that small business might not be able to at this point. Right? Again, what is the next thing that we discuss? The trends. So again, when we are talking about the trends, we could look at trends on so many different levels. We can look at the trends in terms of, is the revenue going up? We could look at trends in terms of the number of people who are being employed. We could look at trends on the basis of how is this particular business doing in terms of their profits, or are their margins increasing over a period of time. So trends, as soon as we talk about trends, we usually talk about the performance of that particular company on different parameters over a period of time, right? Because trends always refers to a period of time. It is never a static metric that today it's doing good. That's not a trend. That's just the current situation. But when we talk about trend, we are talking about how is this particular brand performing on the basis of XYZ, which could be multiple parameters over a period of, say, 1 year, 6 months, 1 quarter, whatever the timeline is. Because we are trying to observe a pattern. We are trying to decipher a pattern in terms of how this particular business is performing, or how a specific function of this business is performing. Make sense? Next, we have the competition, which is, of course, the major players in the market share. So just for reference, Maggie has a market share of 76% in the instant noodle market space, right? Which is a huge market. But having said that, that doesn't mean that Maggi doesn't have any competitors. So Yippee has somewhere around 15+% of the market share when it comes to the instant noodles. So again, in case Maggi wants to acquire the entire market, like they already have a monopoly, but they are going to try and get to 80%. If they would want to go from 76 to 80%, they would have to understand what is Yippee doing in the spaces where they're active. Why? How are they able to still acquire such a significant percentage of the market? Or how are smaller brands like Top Ramen, or for that matter, Baba Ramdev's noodles, etc., are able to have any kind of market share in this space? So until unless Maggie is able to understand that, we can't actually say or comment on how can Maggie grow further. So again, I'm just giving you a reference on why it is very important to understand the competitive landscape also, because competitive landscape can help us understand how our other businesses working, and which could give us some few ideas in terms of how we could compete with them. Or it could just help us understand, uh, you know, what is the best way to counter the competitors in a certain way. So it could both give us both ideas and learnings in terms of what we should do and what we should not be doing. Make sense? So another very important factor that we need to understand, or this is a very, very common terminology that you're going to use and hear a lot of times in your consulting career, which is the word benchmarking. So just to help you understand what benchmarking is, interestingly, we've all been benchmarked against people throughout our lives, right? So when we were kids, we were always being compared with Sharmaji's daughter or Sharmaji's son. That hey, this I mean, of course, it doesn't have to be Sharma as a surname, but just a metaphor that we were always being compared against kids who were, say, doing better than us in academics. That, hey, Sharmaji's son scored a 97%. How are you only scoring 85? So that is nothing but benchmarking in a way. That there is a specific parameter, which is the academics of this particular child, which is being compared against your academic scores, so that you get inspired to do better, right? So benchmarking is always done so that the brand has something to look up to in terms of trying to compete with them. So nobody would say that, oh, you are like this, like you have scored 85%, this particular person has scored 75%, so there's something wrong with you. They're not going to say that, because you're already doing better than them. So whenever benchmarking is being done, usually an aspect or a trait would be compared against a competitor which is likely to be doing better than what you are doing, right? So it kind of helps us look at a standard that we have to achieve with respect to a specific function. So benchmarking is all about having a kind of metric to look at and to kind of compare and then figure out ways to achieve similar performances for your own brand. That's why companies do benchmarking. And lastly, what are the industry trends? During COVID, we realized that the travel industry was very, very badly hit, right? So, if you just compare a company with, say, an edtech startup, you might see that the edtech startup was doing relatively better. But then you can't say that this travel company is doing bad unless you compare it to the rest of the travel companies in terms of how they are performing. Right? So competition often gives you a very well-rounded context with respect to how this particular company is doing with respect to what's going on around them. Right? Because it's unfair to compare a company with another startup or another organization which is actually a part of a very different sector or a segment. Okay. Now, when we look at 3Cs, today 3Cs as a concept has expanded, and there are 4 or 5 more C's that you can look at to get a better understanding of the business. First one being collaboration. So collaboration, like the name suggests, refers to the kind of partners that the business is working with, right? So what are these partners, and is it necessary for all businesses to have partners? In the world that we are living today, yes. So even Metvy, in a way, is collaborating with Google to avail their G Suite services, which allows us to be on this meet right now. Right? So in a way, Google is a partner to us. Right? A partnership might not always mean a partnership of equals. Even if I'm using a product of another brand or I'm using a service of another brand, I'm still in a way partnering with them. Right? The next thing that we have is the channels. So channels usually refers to the marketing channels in terms of how the brand is reaching out to the customers. But it could also sometimes be referred to the supply chain. What are the ways through which the product is being converted from a raw material to a finished product which has a certain kind of value? That entire process could also be referred to the supply chain. Make sense? Next, we have costs. This is again very self-explanatory. Where is the business spending the money that they have or that they are making? Competencies. What makes your client good at something, right? What is that one thing that actually helps them grow faster? So every business, irrespective of how small or big they are going to have their own set of strengths and weaknesses. So when you study their competencies, you are able to understand that, okay, even if this is a small business, there is this one thing that they do better than most of the other players in the market. And lastly, of course, the culture. How is the business functioning? How is it dealing with the people who are working in the organization? What are the relationships, the bonds that they share? What does the culture look like? I mean, do they have a very aggressive culture? Do they have a laid back culture? Do they have a balanced culture in terms of how people are working? This could also include things like the kind of policies that the business might have within them, right? So Reliance as an organization is known to be a more conservative, a more traditional business in terms of how they work, even at the top management level, even at this point of time. So most of the decision makers who are working in Reliance are still very close to the family, to the Ambani family, right? Or they have worked with them for a very long period of time, which might not be the case for, say, a startup, because it's relatively a young company. So You won't have people who are extremely experienced or who are very, very strongly connected with the founders. It may or may not be the case. And therefore, the way that the culture shapes up might be extremely different, right? You might have more freedom of decision making, or for that matter, more freedom of coming out with ideas in, say, a startup as compared to, say, a Reliance, where you might have to take different paths to make sure that you're able to get something done. Having said that, that might have its own set of strengths, that Reliance might be able to ensure that a lot of their information is protected, right? Because the people who are working at the top decision making level are very, very close to the founders. So A, they have a skin in the game. B, they are already trusted and they already have a significant amount of experience in terms of carrying out their work, right? So different cultures could be there with different kind of strengths and weaknesses. And this is true for all the consulting firms as well, by the way. All right. So again, just concluding three C's, it actually helps you understand the business itself and where it's coming from.